Chapter 17. Bryce slung Edward over his shoulder, and he started to walk. "I come to get you for Sarah Ruth," Bryce said. "You don't know Sarah Ruth. She's my sister. She's sick, and she had her a baby doll made out of china. She loved that baby doll, but he broke it. He was drunk, and he stepped on the baby's head, and he smashed it to 100 pieces. Then pieces were so small, I couldn't make them go back together. I tried. At this point in his story, Bryce stopped walking, and he shook his head and he wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "Sarah Ruth ain't had nothing to play with ever since. He won't buy her nothing. He says she don't need nothing. He says she don't need nothing because she ain't gonna live. But he don't know." Bryce started walking again. "He don't know," he said. Who he was not clear to Edward. What was clear was that he was being taken to a child to make up for a lost doll. A doll. Edward loathed dolls, and to be thought as a likely replacement for a doll offended him. But still, it was, he had to admit, a highly preferable alternative to hanging by his ears from a post. The house in which Bryce and Sarah Ruth lived in was so small and crooked that Edward did not believe at first that it was a house. He mistook it instead of a chicken coop instead. There were 2 beds of kerosene, a kerosene lamp, and not much else. Bryce laid Edward at the foot of one of the beds and then lit the lamp. "Sarah," Bryce whispered. "Sarah Ruth, you got to wake up now, honey. I brung you something." He took the harmonica out of his pocket and played the beginning of a simple melody. The little girl sat up in her bed and immediately started to cough. Bryce put his hand on her back. "That's all right," he told her. "It's okay." She was young, maybe 4 years old, and she had white blonde hair, and even in the poor light of the lamp, Edward could see that her eyes had the same gold fleck, brown as Bryce did. "That's all right," said Bryce. "You go on ahead and cough." Sarah Ruth obliged to him. She coughed and she coughed and she coughed and coughed. On the wall of the cabin, the kerosene light cast a shadow, a trembling shadow, hunching over and small. The cough was the saddest sound that Edward had ever heard, sadder even than the mournful call of a whippoorwill. Finally, Sarah Ruth stopped. Bryce said, "You want to see what I brung you?" Sarah Ruth nodded. "You gotta close your eyes." The girl closed her eyes. Bryce picked up Edward and held him so that he was standing straight, like a soldier at the end of the bed. "All right, you can open them." Sarah Ruth opened her eyes, and Bryce moved Edward's china legs and china arms so it looked as though he were dancing. Sarah Ruth laughed and clapped. "Rabbit," she said. "He's for you, honey," said Bryce. Sarah Ruth looked first at Edward and looked at Bryce, and then back at Edward, and her eyes wide and disbelieving. "He's yours." "Mine?" Sarah Ruth. Edward was soon to discover rarely that more than one word at a time, words at several of them strung together, made her cough. She limited herself. She said only what she needed to say. "Yours," said Bryce. "I got 'em special for you." His knowledge provoked another fit of coughing in Sarah Ruth, and she hunched over again. When the fit was done, she uncurled herself and she held out her arms. "That's right," said Bruce. He handed Edward over to her. "Baby," said Sarah Ruth. She rocked Edward back and forth and stared down at him and smiled. Never in his life had Edward been called a baby. Abilene had not done it, nor had Nellie, and most certainly Bull had not done it. It was a singular sensation to be held so gently and so fiercely, to be stared down at with so much love. Edward felt the whole of his china body flood with warmth. "You gonna give him a name, honey?" Bryce asked. "Jangles," said Sarah Ruth without taking her eyes off of Edward. "Jangles, huh? That's a good name. I like that name." Bryce patted Sarah Ruth on the head. She continued to stare down at Edward. "Hush," she said to Edward as she rocked him back and forth. "From the minute I first saw him," said Bryce, "I knew he belonged to you. I said to myself, that rabbit is for Sarah Ruth for sure." "Jangles," muttered Sarah Ruth. Outside the cabin, thunder cracked, and then came the sound of rain falling on the tin roof. Sarah Ruth rocked Edward back and forth, and Bryce took out his harmonica and started to play, making his song keep rhythm with the rain.